At 10 a.m. today, it was 32 degrees. My little Irish body is not able for this Mediterranean heat. I'm sorry, the ancestors have spoken. No. So if you see me like fanning myself in this video, please be nice. Anyway, welcome back to multaverba. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about learning multiple languages at the same time. So maybe you saw one of those videos where it's like, white man surprises Asians with perfect Chinese, and you kind of thought to yourself like, hey, I want to learn multiple languages. Or maybe you saw one of those videos where it's like, teen speaks 250 languages in one day. No. All those like kind of clickbait titles. And maybe you thought to yourself like, hey, I want to be a polyglot. Hey, I want to learn multiple languages. Well, love, you're in the right place, innit? For those of you who don't know, I've been learning like foreign languages since I was maybe like 6 or 7, starting with French. I currently live also in a foreign country. And on top of that, I'm also undertaking like a languages degree in college. So I feel like I'm pretty qualified to answer the question of how to learn multiple languages at the same time. However, I do recommend that you watch some other YouTubers like videos on this, because this will definitely help you to get more of a perspective on how, like what methods work best for you. So I want to start off with like things that you should consider before you learn multiple languages. The first thing that I want to point out is that it's much better to build gradually. What I mean by this is that by learning one language to a pretty good level and then moving on to begin like another language is a much better position to be in than starting 2 languages absolutely from scratch. Let's say, for example, you already have like a intermediate level in French, for example, and you say to yourself like, hey, I want to learn Spanish. That's a much better position to be in than deciding, hey, I want to learn French and Spanish from scratch. The reason for this is because like learning a new language, particularly starting off from scratch, is a lot of work, and that language will require a lot of time and energy, and it'll be much more difficult to put that into multiple languages as opposed to just one. The other thing to consider as well is that when you're learning multiple languages, you're obviously going to make slower progress. This is completely due to the fact that like we as humans only have finite time before our ultimate demise, and we only have a certain amount of hours a day. Let's say that every day you have 1 hour to devote to language learning, and you devote that hour to Japanese. That will give you a total of 7 hours a week. Yeah, it is. Am I dumb? However, let's say that you decide you want to learn Japanese and Thai, for example. Suddenly that hour is split in 2. As opposed to having like an hour a day for Japanese, you're now spending 30 minutes on Japanese and 30 minutes on Thai. So as opposed to having those 7 hours a week, you're now only having 3.5 hours a week. Another thing that I want to point out as well is that it's generally not recommended to learn languages from the same language family. And I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. Now, that's not to say that you can't learn, for example, 2 Romance languages. But as I was saying earlier, it's much better to learn one of them and then move on to another, instead of starting from scratch with 2 very similar languages at the same time. Let's say, for example, that you want to learn Spanish and Italian completely from scratch at the same time. That's not necessarily recommended. And I'm not saying that you can't do it, but bear in mind that Spanish and Italian have very similar grammar, very similar vocab, and also just have a very similar phonology as well. However, if you learned a language, not even like from like a different language family, but a language that was just distinct enough, that's going to be a much better position to put yourself in. For example, let's say you learn Spanish and Romanian. Yes, Romanian, of course, is a Latin-based language, just like Spanish. However, at the same time, the phonology of Romanian and Spanish are quite distinct. Romanian and Spanish grammar are also very distinct from each other in terms of grammar. For example, Romanian still maintains grammatical case and the 3 genders from Latin, whereas Spanish only has 2 genders and no grammatical case. However, that's not to say that you can't learn like 2 similar languages at the same time, or even like languages like from the same family. For example, I'm currently studying like Arabic and Hebrew, which you can watch, I think it will be here. I might want to do a video like comparing the 2 languages at some point, but let me know in the comments below if you want that. What am I doing with my hands? Just write in the comments if you want the video. On top of that, there's a really like good series on the channel Polyglot Progress, where both of the hosts start Spanish and Italian from scratch. I think it's called the Romance Language Challenge. However, it's definitely a video worth watching. It's really well put together, and it does kind of like put into perspective like the difficulties and also the advantages of learning like 2 languages that are as similar as Spanish and Italian at the same time. The next section of this video I'm calling the howevers, and as someone who like enjoys learning multiple languages at once, I don't want to completely discourage you from like learning multiple languages at once, because for some people it does work, like for example in my case. I was watching another video from Abigail over on Polyglot Progress where she actually had a very good quote when it came to learning multiple languages. I believe the video was called Learning Multiple Languages is like cross-training, I think. I don't know anything about sports. Abigail, if you're watching, which you're probably not, I'm so sorry. And for example, in the point that I've just made about how your progress will be slow if you're learning multiple languages, she did mention one thing in her video which I think really stuck out. And she said, I'm not trying to learn a language as fast as I can. And I feel like this is very much an overlooked point in the language learning community in general, is that it's not a race to become fluent in any language. I mean, sure, in my case, as a languages student, the fact that language is part of my degree, there can at times be an element of speed, I guess, when it comes to studying vocab for a Spanish exam at school, or same goes for Arabic. For example, if you take a language like Hebrew, I mean, sure, I take a college class once a week, but it's not going to really affect my degree at all. On top of that, as I mentioned in my How I Learned Hebrew video, I'm not Jewish, I don't have a connection to culture, I don't have this kind of, I suppose, a good enough reason for most people to learn Hebrew. For me, it's not necessarily that I need to be super fluent in Hebrew overnight or anything. It's simply just a language that I enjoy learning. Another point that I want to make on learning multiple languages at once is that I find that dabbling or even doing bits and pieces of multiple languages actually does help me to learn other languages. For example, I want to say from about maybe 2015-16 to 2018, I went through a big phase of learning Slavic languages, in particular Ukrainian, to the point where I actually was accepted to be a contributor on Duolingo. That's a whole chapter of my life. But for example, studying Ukrainian and also dabbling in Polish, Bulgarian, Russian, less so with Bulgarian, definitely did help me have a much deeper understanding of grammar. And that would be something that wouldn't necessarily happen if I had only studied one language. And on top of that, I do find that even though many people find learning multiple languages to give them burnout, I actually find for me it's the opposite. I find learning one language and focusing on one language for a very long extension of time really just burns me out and causes a lot of boredom for me. On top of that, for me, switching between different languages, it has been a part of my life for quite a while. For example, when I went into high school, I went to an Irish language immersion school. For those who don't know, in immersion schools, they're generally very highly bilingual environments. You're usually switching between Irish and English all day long. Or even when it comes to my daily life here in France, I mean, a lot of my close friends speak Spanish, my native language is English, and on top of that, I'm living in France, so I have to use French. There will be times, for example, that I'll be sitting in an Arabic class, which is being given in French, while texting my friend in Spanish. For me, just constant switching and constant moving when it comes to language learning, it definitely helps me to prevent burnout. So this section I have labeled, yeah, get into it. So now I want to give my tips when it comes to learning multiple languages at the same time. So the first thing is to know your limits. Ideally, I feel even just 15 minutes over the course of the day, not necessarily even a 15-minute block where you have to sit down and study this deep grammar concept, but even for example, if you do 5 minutes of Duolingo in the morning, 5 minutes of Duolingo at lunch, and then 5 minutes of Duolingo after dinner, that's 15 minutes just spread over the day, and you're still kind of chipping away at the language. And obviously the amount of time will depend on what your goal and which languages you want to focus on, etc. Another thing when it comes to your limits and things is also, I personally like to keep the languages separate. So for example, I always find that I tend to study Hebrew in usually the morning time or in the nighttime. I don't know where this routine came from. It's just kind of something that I feel more drawn to do, and now it's kind of become part of my routine. This contrasts to Arabic, for example, where I like to do kind of a singular block during the day, and that's just something that works for me. So it'll always depend on what languages you're learning, what your goals are, and how much time and energy you can devote to each one. Another thing that I think is really important when learning multiple languages at the same time is to really hone in on your accent and pronunciation. This will help you to really differentiate between languages and prevent you mixing them up. A lot of recall when it comes to words, particularly when you're speaking, is muscle memory. For example, when we're speaking English, we don't really think of how we spell a word as we speak as native speakers. We just speak because it's a lot of it is just muscle memory. For example, if I'm speaking Hebrew and Arabic, these are both Semitic languages, however the phonology of both of these languages are quite different. If I'm saying a simple phrase for example, that resh sound is something that doesn't exist in Arabic, and this will help me to not mix up the words or accidentally say the word in Arabic, because I I'm using a slightly like different part of my mouth to speak Arabic. On top of that, it's also worth knowing like what role will this language like play in your life. Is it a language that you're learning for school? Is it a language you're learning for work? Is it a language that you want to speak with your friends? Is it a heritage language that you want to speak with your family, for example? Different languages are going to like take up different spaces in your life, and as such you're going to like need a different approach. For example, Spanish and French for me are mostly like social languages because those are the situations that I use it mostly. This is in contrast, for example, with language like Arabic, which I don't use that much in my daily life, apart from like having like very like brief conversations with like a couple of my friends who help me. But because Arabic for me is like an academic language and also a language that I'm hoping to use like in a future career, for example, my approach to learning Arabic is going to be a little bit different. This is why I'm putting so much energy into Fusha, or like written Arabic. Of course there are like dialects as well, but like I mean that's a slow progress because like, have you heard how Moroccans speak Arabic?
Parce que moi, je suis intelligent. فهمتيني حبيبة?
Another approach that I personally use like to maintain and to also like practice all the different like languages that I'm studying is a method known as laddering. Laddering is like the most like meta thing when it comes to like language learning, and that is the idea that you learn like a new language through another language. For example, this is like currently what I'm doing with Arabic. My Arabic classes in school are conducted through French, so like my material that I'm using to learn Arabic and like when I take notes and everything, I'm writing down all the explanations and translations into French. The advantage is that you actually like get to not only maintain but also practice a language that you already know quite well, along with learning a new language as well. And it's a really good method to like learn multiple languages at the same time. Another thing as well is that sometimes it's actually easier to ladder than to actually like just like jump right in and start like learning X language like from your native language. For example, like let's say you speak Spanish and you go onto a website like Duolingo. Duolingo does offer courses in Guarani and Catalan. However, the courses are only available through Spanish. So for example, let's say that you want to learn either of these languages on Duolingo. You can't actually learn these languages unless you speak Spanish. So you can actually end up like picking up like a whole new language while being able to still practice like a language that you already know. So that's pretty much it for this video. I don't think I have anything else to add. Basically, in summary, yes, there are disadvantages to learning like multiple languages at the same time. It's not necessarily the most productive approach, but at the same time, like it's not this like doom and gloom like kind of idea that like be pushed around the language learning community, and in some ways it can actually like be quite beneficial. However, question of the day is, what languages are you learning and why? Please let me know in the comments below. And are you learning multiple languages at the same time? Because I would also like to know how you are managing with that. I think that's all for this video, but yeah, bye, subscribe or whatever.